Susie Orbach is a British psychotherapist. She's a psychoanalyst. She's a writer and author. And in my view, she is so much more. She's an extraordinary visionary, and she has done so much in terms of psychotherapy and healing women's trauma. Welcome, Susie.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here, even though the topic is so enraging and hurtful and at the same time.
So Susie, take us back. You have been a pioneer in the field. You're an extraordinary person. Take us back to 1976, when you and your friend and colleague, Louise Eichenbaum, set up the Women's Therapy Centre, I think in London, and then later in New York. A book came out, Fat as a Feminist Issue. Tell us about what was going on in your mind, in your world. What was the world like back then?
It was 1976. The world had been in turmoil, but it was an exuberant time. It was an exciting time. I was coming of age. We were coming of age, and our generation felt that we were changing the public conversation. The women's liberation movement followed in the wake of the civil rights movement and Black Power. It followed in the wake of all the protests and the ending of the Vietnam War. And it was, we'd been in a women's studies program that had started because of that period. And what we discovered, or what we were understanding, is that the structures that were of inequality, of patriarchy, of misogyny, of racism, that were in the world were also inside of us. They were as though they were concrete structures inside of us. So although we had these consciousness raising groups in which women gave testimony of their experience and how it shaped them, we wanted another way of understanding how we enacted, how we were so much part of our own, I guess, our own oppression, and we didn't want to be. And the only discipline that we thought of for that was psychoanalysis. And that was highly problematic because in those days, and still to some extent, psychoanalysis had stopped being a progressive practice and it had become a normative practice of resocializing women and getting them, you know, in the post-World War II period, getting them back to the home and looking at their needs as somehow the problem. And you know, it was a Stepford Wives moment in psychoanalysis. But we knew there was something about listening and hearing one another. And I think our vision was that we needed a women's therapy center to be able to hear and work with what we were experiencing as therapists, because we were trained at that point, what we were hearing from the people that who were coming to us. And we wanted to transform the field just as every other field was being transformed. You know, we were involved in women in history courses, women in economics courses. We wanted something that recognized that there was a growing power of women. You've got to think of who the thinkers were then. I mean, within psychoanalysis, the most, you know, we had Frantz Fanon as the most progressive. And then we had some women who had been, in a way, buried and forgotten. And we wanted to revive all of that and lay a claim to a space for women that would then influence the profession and society. We wanted to, I guess, enable ourselves. And we set up in the bottom of my place, which was a working class area of London. It no longer is, because, you know, property being what property is. And we let it be known in the local newspaper, like they still had local newspapers in those days. And we tried to provide a service, I suppose, is what we would have seen ourselves doing at that point, for women and their families. And that meant that women came from the local neighborhood. Women also came from the feminist movement. And I think because we answered the phones and did everything, we knew what was wanted. And as we listened to the people that we were engaging with, we formed a service that we thought could be responsive. And a sort of key feature of Louise's and my reign at the Women's Therapy Centre was answering the phones. Because we thought that in hearing what was wanted, we would be, it would like having an ear to the ground. Yes. And we would hear the hesitancies or the desires or the hopes, and by providing a home for people who wanted to practice. So that's kind of that's how it started. I'm not sure what your question was, but that's how it started. And out of that, of course, we built theory and we built different ways of practicing. And
wow. And, you know, I love what you just were saying about having, right, that ear to the ground, because you were getting the pulse of what was needed at that, as we think about almost that grassroots level, right? And you were shifting a paradigm, right, of what the role of treatment needed to be in women's lives. So, you know, I'm curious, as you look now, right, look now here in present day, and as you're looking back in 1976, right? What have you seen in the evolution of, you know, women's place in society? I'm listening to you, and I was born in 1977.
And me in 79.
And my mother, when she had to go on maternity leave, her boss told her he felt like either you come back to work, or I actually personally believe that a woman's place is in the home. And my mother couldn't afford to stay at home, nor did she want to, right? But that was a dilemma for women in the 70s. It was an either or. And so I'm curious what evolutional patterns you've seen for women's places.
Well, I think it's an interesting question, Eboni, whether it was evolution or whether there's also been reaction, right? So I think you need to keep those two things going, because before you were born, I had already worked. At one point, I thought I'd be a lawyer, and I'd already worked on the first proposal for parental leave at the City University. And the partner of my children, was the first person to take it in the 80s, right? So it was still a very foreign thing to do. But that has really changed. And certainly in Britain, we have very different labor laws than you do in the United States. And Europe has much better laws than we do in England, okay, in the United Kingdom. But I think, so what we can say first is that women's external entitlement to be in the world has changed. I'm going to probably contradict myself in some of what I say, but that's one piece. I think if I look at the younger women, they have an internal entitlement to emotional recognition. Whether they get it or not is another question, but they have much more sense that they ought to, or they should. They should have an okay sex life. They should be more able to be determining their life. They should be able to make friendships with women of real value, which are not second-class friendships. That, you know, if I think about how we used to negotiate going out with our boyfriends, and then we'd want a night with the girls, and it was kind of a coffee clutch, as opposed to it was as important.
Yes.
That's really changed. If I think about women's right to speak, now I don't think we've necessarily been heard.
Right? Yes. Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Heard, listened to,
So there's a difference between a sense of taking up space and daring to be talking, even though there is a phenomenal, and there has been a phenomenal pushback
Yes.
against women, really, over this, really in Britain, in very different forms since the time that the two of you were born. It was it was padded shoulders, i.e. something to do with a feminized masculinized femininity rather than women as women.
Right.
But so I think that has been an enormous change, but I will talk some about how there hasn't been also.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think it's a contradiction. I think it's just the paradox here, right? That as some things change, there are these pieces, the archaic pieces that continue to hold on. And so it makes it very complicated to progress in a linear manner. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, this is not to blame women at all, but apart from what was going on in the social and political structure, because I'm a psychoanalyst and I'm going to think this way, I have to think about the generation of women who were raising kids without themselves having had the experience of being listened to or entitled. And so what they projected onto their daughters was, go do it, you can be a success, you can do it, without understanding actually what we were involved in was a collective experience where we were all doing it together, as opposed to having expectation foisted on us. And that is not to blame the moms, because they were trying to do something, but it can leave a hollow inside of that next generation in a funny kind of way.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
And that, Susie, perhaps takes us on to our next question, which is about a woman's sense of self in light of everything that happened, especially around, what was going on at the time and that intersection of sexism. So, you mentioned that kind of hollow, there were complex societal forces happening and have been happening. And do you just want to say a little bit about, that woman's sense of self in all of this?
Well, I'm going to take the question this way, and then if I haven't got it right, you'll come back to me. Okay. Because I think it's what's been very interesting to me, and what might have started off as something that I didn't realize was central, but it's part of a woman's sense of self is the body that she does or doesn't inhabit, the sense of body, that it is body that is being attacked. Now, we've seen in the last year, well, it's never stopped, the attack on Black bodies, for goodness sake. But the specific attack that I'm going to talk about is the attack on women's bodies. And what we've seen is that body is both personal, but it's again a structure of the self. That makes sense.
Can you say a little bit more?
Yes. So it's totally central to us, right? We aren't just a psyche. We're also a body that has been gendered and raised in particular ways, and that can relate, of course, in Britain very much to class issues, to race issues, to geography, to the history of where your family came from. What you actually embody in the making of body is as profound as what you take in the making of psyche.
Right. Yes.
Okay. Now, so you have that, and you have these enormous commercial interests pressing in, structurally attacking first women's bodies, certainly in the 70s and 80s and 90s, but latterly children's bodies and men's bodies and non-binary, the whole area, okay? And we know that there are just enormous profits being made by destabilizing everybody's body. That is part of what we don't realize is happening, even though we realize it's happening, and which we then enact incredible hurts on ourselves in the sense of inadequacies, not being okay, that, and trying to improve and perfect and change and produce a body that is acceptable. That's on one level. At the other level, and I'm thinking internationally here because it's very, very easy for people in England not to hear this, or the UK, is that bodies are also, women's bodies are also used in war. They are assaulted. Women's bodies are a booty of war.
Yeah.
And the war as it plays out in terms of mass violence towards women, or the capturing and mass rape of women, is something that does infiltrate our psyches. It can't not. And in America, in North America, the assault on women's right to control their bodies in terms of whether it's abortion or whether they are pregnant and require cancer treatment, and who has rights? Is it the baby or is it the woman? Which actually is being contested in certain states, should make us realize that there is an assault at the level of women's very important sense of self. This is her body.
Yeah.
It undermines your psyche. We used to think of psyches as undermining self, dumping your pain onto your body. Now, I think we've got such an assault on the body that it is undermining psyche, if I can divide them in that way, if that's understandable.
And Susie, I just want to repeat what you said earlier. You said, I think I've got this right. You know, profits are made by destabilizing the female body. I mean, I think that's absolutely profound. Because
well, it's a structure, isn't it? It
absolutely is.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I wanted to leave my work on, when I wrote Fat as a Feminist Issue behind. I've now written 4 books on this thing because I'm always having to look at how much bigger, how much more penetrative are the commercial forces. So that even in pregnancy, women are preoccupied about getting back into a pre-pregnancy body as though they never had the thing that just happened. Right?
Yes.
And if you look at the fashion, the beauty industry, the food industry, the cosmetic surgery industry, which is tiny compared to the other industries, not only do they pollute and ravage the world, but they pollute and ravage girls from a very early age.
Yeah.
And they are the territory we're offered for pleasure. And yet they are a territory of, they're not heroin, they're not crack cocaine, but they ain't much better. They are dangerous. They're legal industries. You can look at the 2 richest people in Europe. They are both in the fashion industry. The third one is the person who owns the majority share in L'Oreal, beauty industry. So these are legalized industries which we partake in, which not only despoil the planet, which we know, but they are affecting us in the heart of our bodies and our self-experience. And that's a bloody hard thing to deal with in individual therapy, frankly.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Do you have that word in the States, Eboni, bloody? We use it here quite a lot.
No, we have a full bevy of, you know, equivalents that I shall not repeat here. So yeah,
Bloody's perfectly polite, actually.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm just conscious we've got an amazing turnout from people all over America. So there might be some British terms that we might sound a bit sort of foreign. So
no, it's all good. Our polite terms are just not polite. So but something as you were speaking, Susie, stood out to me is what I think can often be a very strong corporate approach to acquisition, right? Where something is greater and more valuable if you break it up into its parts and then sell it off, right? And the devastation of when that is a human body.
Yeah,
And
that is such a great parallel, Eboni. I mean, that is really brilliant.
It's
Thank
terrifying though. It's terrifying though, right? And you're right, the fragmentation that I see in the minds of the victims of that mindset, it's staggering how to heal and restore kind of as one of my favorite poems of the loveliness of our clients, and I'm curious. Oh, go ahead, please.
Well, the thing is, what really hurts me is sometimes we're not restoring. Sometimes we're having to build from the beginning.
That's right.
We're having to undo and be representative of what could be loving. Yeah. You're absolutely correct. Right. So I that's why I was interrupting. I just thought, no, there isn't a pristine us. There isn't us that is the result of who we are and our agency in relation to it, right? It's that's not right. It's our engagement with things that are problematic as well as wonderful. That's right. And there's a weight to it. And I think the hard part too is our own parallel as women, right? And walking amongst that story and embodying it and being awash with it as well. Absolutely. Yeah, and I suppose for me, I don't really know. This is where I think generationally, I was part of a lucky generation. It was before individualism. Yes. Was the cell. Yeah. Yes. You're so correct. We have all these connections, and yet we are so separate and isolated. And even especially in the States, where we are not a collectivist society in any way, shape, or form. And it gets worse in so many ways with all the various waves of things that are happening. I'm curious, Susie, your thoughts about this, because you were talking about kind of not necessarily an evolution, but a reaction, right? And so I see some of these reactions of, right, this non-communal collectivist mindset, but this individualist pointing towards kind of body positivity, right? And I feel like that's almost a reaction to what's happened in light of toxic shame and the ongoing patriarchy, and so what are the challenges that you see for women? You see, I don't know, because I'm part of a group, or I was part of a group that we started at the turn of the century called Anybody, which was fighting body hatred and the selling of it, both in England, America, and around the world, at the export of body hatred as a way of entering modernity. And it was a group made up of many youngsters. And so over this period, let's say the last 8 to 10 years, it becomes a virtual group. Right? And I think none of us know how to do political activity and collectivism anymore. So we know how to follow somebody, or we know how to be part of something, let's say body positivity, or part of a group. But we don't know how to express a collective movement in a way that's going to have an impact. I mean, that's what was so important about Black Lives Matter in the middle of COVID. Because it unleashed that desire
Yes. Yes.
for collective political action. Unfortunately, you know, the other side will work very hard to push it back. And, you know, we are very much imperiled in this world. We are, I don't think we should in any sense underestimate the peril that we are in.
I 100% agree. Yes.
The reaction. I think it is very, very serious. And we have to understand that there is trauma, since we're talking trauma, that is driving all of these siloed reactions to what is going on in our world.
Yes.
You know,
And
the structural horrors of exclusion and othering are also psychological structures.
Yes.
Which imperil us. I don't know if I've gone completely off point. You were talking about body positivity, but you know, we used to go to the fashion shows and fight them, you know, not fight them, but say, come on, make clothing in different sizes, make it sustainable. This is back in 2000.
Right. No, you're right on point, because what I'm taking from this is that body positivity without community has lost its roots, right? You know,
it's great. It's great for the individual if they can do it, if they can do it.
Right, if they can do it.
You need support to do it. You need to dare.
Yes, yes.
And the best way to dare is with other people.
And I would agree with that. I think the parallel of even with Black Lives Matter in comparison to the Black Power movement and the Civil Rights movement, which was so deeply rooted in community. And, you know, what made even the recent movements with Black Lives Matter so complicated was the pandemic, because there was so much separation out of necessity, right? And we need the communal and shared working together in presence with each other, right? Because then otherwise it's those echo chambers in the internet and social media that can validate, but they don't resonate, right? And I think we've lost resonance with each other.
Yeah, and I guess what's so wonderful about therapy, I mean, I'm in my therapy room and have been since April, because we had we had such a good vaccination program. It's about the only thing we can say good about our government, but we did. And what has been really wonderful for the people who weren't stuck in the wrong countries was being in person. And I think that we as therapists have this very privileged relationship about being person to person with people. And a lot of people are living, they don't go online, they live online. That's where they live.
Yeah.
And that's problematic, because we haven't figured out how to organize it yet. We really haven't.
No.
And let's just take a moment to, you know, again, go a little bit deeper into that. You know, we've had COVID globally. It's completely derailed the profession in some ways, everyone having to go online, you know, within an instant. We are at a time in society where everything is about social media. We have, you know, perhaps say a little bit more, Susie, around your thoughts around the impact of social media on the psyche, of the body of young girls. Because what we were just talking about was, you know, embodiment and coming together and movement and action and power in proximity, in the interpersonal neurobiology with others. That's how the world has moved. These last, I don't know, year, 2 years, 5 years, we've just seen, it's almost like a explosion forward, whether it's TikTok or Instagram or whatever people are doing, as you say, now living online. So how is that affecting sense of self with regard to young girls, and also the impact on structures moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's really, I think we know that it's been basically disastrous. Okay, I mean, what are people looking for when if they live online and they're into the kind of social media that is about likes. They're looking for recognition. They're looking to be understood. They're looking for everything that human beings always, and they're looking to make a contribution. But the forms of recognition and the forms of contribution are, it's not just that we're in our own silos, but the actual way of doing it is quite narrow.
Yeah.
It doesn't, you know, who reads a lot of, you don't want to, it's, okay, they're brilliant films. Brilliant people do brilliant things with this. But there is something where it becomes, and it's designed to become, a compulsive activity where you reproduce or you look for the likes. We know that you want 160 likes.
Yep.
You want it, but you don't get it, so you reframe it, so you feel like shit. You feel like, how do I do this? I mean, it's compelling. It's not like we're crazy for doing it. It is meant to compel. And it's a bit like they're conversations that on the one hand do meet the places that need to be met, but they're not sustainable at the right level. I think we make a mistake if we say they're too superficial, because they do hit something, but I don't know that we figured out yet how to do it at a level that is substantial.
Because there's something about being together, and I really wish this conference, hopefully one day, will be in person, because
Let's do it.
There's something different that happens when bodies are in contact, near one another, talking, communicating, doing what we do. The pleasure of bodies together in a space, the feel, the smell, the way we impact on each other, the way we take each other in or are frightened of each other, whatever, all of that is part of how our collective and our individual subjectivity gets expressed. And we've become very frightened of bodies during COVID. And okay, there have been lots of pluses. Bodies that were not visible are now visible, and all of that kind of thing. That has been really important, and particularly in the UK, where, you know, the bodies of Black and Asian workers within the health service or within the deliveries, food service. I mean, all those things became very visible. Okay, but yes, there's something about how, and we know in therapy, I mean, we are in a therapy conference. So for me, having bodies in the room, or having a body or a couple in the room, or is how my body and their body speak to each other, and how we impact upon each other, and how we transform and touch each other, literally, by our sweating, breathing, comfortable uncomfortableness, and what it tells us about what is troubling and what needs transforming.
Yes. Yeah. It's really the concept of like checks and balances, isn't it, Susie? Like the body check, the body balance. Is, you know, in the media, you can say whatever you want to say. And if you don't like what someone's saying, you can delete their comments, right? Or you can unfriend. And so you never really, and that's my concern, like what you're saying here is not just that we have lost empathy for each other through absence of presence, but we've also lost our own internal check and balance, you know, of, you know, I have many clients who are like, well, I don't even know. It makes me feel terrible. And I'm like, well, what do you sense you need? I don't know anymore. They're driven into these echo chambers, and they've lost their own sense of their own limits, and when they've had enough, or when it's been too much, right? And
that's so interesting. Yeah,
I fear it, right? I fear what happens.
And they have fantasy relationships, because these are not.
Oh,
they're both real, but they're fantastical because your projections onto.
That's right.
Which we know about because of our work, are phenomenal and very hard. You can have love affairs online, it's nothing to do with the other.
No.
The other is a figment.
Right. An absolute figment. It's imaginal play online. Yeah.
I
So
love
we're
that
in
what you
very,
just
I mean, I
said.
think we are in perilous times. I'm saying it again. We are in difficult times.
Yes, we are.
And we haven't figured out how to turn that imaginative play into substantial social change. And we're in a period where we're going towards disembodiment, because the whole promise of AI is that we will lose our bodies. I mean, we've already lost them because we're all supposed to look the same.
Right.
But we're really going to lose them if we don't have them.
And let's take this, Susie, to what you're talk about the impact on mental health. Talk about the impact to, you know, the DSM, the ICD-10, the, you know, what we go by. Talk about that kind of attack on a woman, a girl's sense of self, and how that then shows in the statistics that we're seeing in terms of, you know, higher rates of PTSD, anxiety, depression, bipolar, borderline. I mean, you name it. You know, there's a name for everything. There's a diagnosis for everything. Talk about that.
Well, I don't know if I'll get in trouble if I talk about it, because I don't know whether it matters in terms of your certificates. But, you know, I hate the diagnostic system. I don't think it's, you know, we could just open any page of the DSM, and I guarantee you the three of us would find ourselves on that page.
Yeah.
Now, how useful is that? Okay, that is the structure of how our field is operating, and which is towards manualized therapies, towards this is who you are. And even, you know, even though there are exceptions and exceptions and exceptions, it's a way of expressing distress. Different periods throw up different forms of distress. So in the 19th century, you had hysteria. That was how women expressed it. They had fainting spells. And working class women, incidentally, who had exactly the same symptoms, were just considered shirkers. But the middle and upper middle class women, they had the fainting disorder. They had hysteria. They had, that's where Freud's work starts. So in my time, in the 50s, it was vaginismus. From the 70s and 80s and 90s on, it has been body dysmorphias. It's been transformation of the body, cutting, anorexias, self-hatred of the body. So the question then is that is an expression of extraordinary hurt, sorrow, screaming, wanting, and being desperate that one can't. So when you say, Tracy, what's the impact on mental health? It's not being able to get on with the business of living. It's the business of living being involved in the preoccupation with the hurt of self and the attempt to repair it through these mainly bodily manifestations. I mean, particularly for girls and women. I'm not talking, I mean, it's increasingly so for boys and men, but there are other forms as well for them. So particularly for girls and women, I think it is, you know, the lassitude, the depression, the compulsive, is our attempts. We have to ask ourselves, what is the symptom for which, you know, what is the problem for which these symptoms exist? The symptoms are always an attempted solution, aren't they? So what is the problem? The problem is the state of growing up in this world now. And there's no, I think it's really what Eboni's saying, is not really a line between what comes at you and what you're putting out. It's sort of, it's a real struggle to have any kind of boundary and separation, which allows you to be both separate, what Louise and I have called separated attachments. How do you have that sense of being both autonomous and connected. How do you get that? How do you get those two things going?
Yeah.
So disastrous, I suppose, is the impact, I would say, Tracy.
Yes. Yes.
And yet we're all still fighting and standing. And
Right.
in a way, so many people are going into mental health professions because people want to give. They want to contribute.
Yes.
They have their own pain, and they also want to be able to help others with theirs.
Yeah. Thank you.
And if I may, to this piece with the DSM and everything, I remember probably was a month ago when I guess our, judicial committees were coming against, social media as having this devastating impact on young girls' bodies, right? And I'm sitting here looking at this news and thinking, oh, yes, I guess the sky is blue as well, right? I mean, it was just, why did it take a committee to determine that, right? And I think that's the frustrating piece, is that whoever is in power, right, gets to decide the legitimacy of things that we have been crying about for a long time. Now it's legitimate. Now all these social media companies have to make all these changes, right? Which they're not going to do. Let's just be real about that. But, it's frustrating because it's like, who's coming to the table and who's actually being heard?
Yeah,
right?
but it's so interesting, because if you think about the environmental movement, Rachel Carson, 50s, 60s, 70s, I mean, it takes more than 50 years.
Yes.
And it takes losing the battle and battling again, and then losing the battle. I mean, right, we both alluded to Black Power and civil rights movement, and the fact that we've, where are we, for God's sake? We've got incarceration.
Right. Yeah.
Right. We've got a prison movement. I mean, a prison industry, an industrial prison industry.
That's right.
So to me, we are in what Freud would have called a repetition compulsion. It takes a long damn time.
Yes.
For agendas to really be taken up. And how do you do that when civil society has been broken up and cauterized into silos? How do we do that? And that is a political question. And I think the things that therapists might have to bring to that is, we understand what makes it difficult for people to connect and to manage difference. And that might be a contribution. And maybe one day you'll have a conference which will look at how do we manage difference and being together, because that is part of what breaks political movements. I have no idea who that is at the door, and I'm not answering. But if you're hearing it, it's my doorbell.
Yes. Yes. And you're talking about the intersection of it's the synthesis of how can we be united and not need to be uniform. Right.
Exactly.
So we don't need the uniformity in order to be unified. Right. But there's so much trauma in between those two concepts. Right.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So how do we get to differentiation with connection?
Yes. Yeah. So, I'm curious, as we're seeing all of these traumas occurring, and we have talked about this kind of rise of violence, right, in reaction. And that's the piece, right? The lack of kind of unity to move forward. Are you, I don't want to say that you're concerned, you should be concerned, but, I see a kind of reaction too of even organized male groups.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. And they perceive that they're being victimized by systems in favor of women. And so it feels like that continues then to be the wedge of how we can't find that connection. And
I don't think patriarchy is good for men.
Yes.
I'm not of that. I know some people really do think it's good for men. I think it is rubbish for everybody, actually. I think those structures of power are terrible that we have,
Mm-hmm.
and that they've become more emphasized, we've become more strategized, more authoritarian, more everything that is not helpful. So of course you're going to get powerlessness being expressed by vamping on Congress and the election. You're going to get incels.
Yes.
You're going to get Fathers for Justice, which is a group in England that wants a relation to their children. Fair enough, but the way in which it's conceptualized or organized is not in the interests of children and actually the men and the women. So yes, I think I'm not surprised that masculinity is in trouble.
Yes.
And
yes.
Men are sold a really rotten form of masculinity still. I mean, it's still that romantic, gorgeous guy with the car and the women and the power and the this. It's not about you make a contribution to the world or to your, it's you're a performer.
Yes. Yeah. And Tracy knows, as we've talked about this, because Audre Lorde is one of my favorite writers, and
mine too.
Right. And so we're still building with the master's tools, right? We're still trying to dismantle a house with those very tools that created the destruction. And I think, and of course, when we see those tools again used against us, right, we're still at that impasse. And it is concerning. It's concerning that I can read literature from whichever era I want to go back to and see the exact same dilemmas, right? We're just dealing with the matches versus the matchbox, right? So, it's difficult. It's very difficult. And yet, right, we have these experiences that are glimmers of hope. And I would say the mindset of young girls now is very different than even the mindset that I came into. That gives me a lot of hope when I start, talking to my young female clients, and their vision of themselves is different. And I am hopeful.
And also, I don't know how many, I mean, I have men in therapy, and I adore them. I mean, they are incredibly impressive in terms of their own struggles and interest. And their interest, okay, maybe there's something about those guys, but they are engaged in their own process, which is not about building up the macho. It's about
That's right.
Being curious about who the hell they are.
That's right. Curiosity. That's what we need, I think, and seeing the strangeness of the structures that have been and questioning them. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm conscious of time, and but we've got sort of a number of questions, Susie, that we would still love to, hear your views on. And one thing that I was thinking of was around, different movements, and what are your thoughts on sort of the health at every size movement that is occurring around the globe right now? What are your kind of thoughts about that? Just as we've been talking about embodiment and bodies and the impact on the body, the impact on the woman's sense of self. What do you think about that?
Well, I haven't been following it recently. I'm very supportive of it. Or let me put it this way, as I knew it, I have been very supportive of it. We've even had one health authority here take it up. So I think that's all I could say. I think health at every size is a very important argument. And I also think health is both a social responsibility. It isn't just an individual one. We're being sold it as an individual one. And so health at every size is also contesting it. So it's very good. I suppose my only criticism would be, and I don't know, they may have changed their views. I'm very much into, and this is a change from when I wrote Fifi, where I talk about, knowing when you're hungry, eat when you're hungry, watch every mouthful so that you know you're present, stop when you're full, see what you're eating when you're not hungry, etc., etc. So, don't deprive yourself of any food. I now would say that we now have a food industry that is making non-food foods.
Yes.
That are made for the bliss point, salt, sugar. I mean, not even real chemicals, air pumped in, that don't get metabolized properly. So I don't know where Health at Every Size is on that, but where I am at on that is make sure it's real food.
Yes. Yeah, and make sure it's accessible to those who can, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll take two questions because we've only got 4 minutes left before we have to start the Q&A.
Yes.
Eboni, I don't know if you had a question. I feel like I've sometimes been hogging the space here.
Oh, no, I just, this has been such a rich discussion. I guess, I do have just my final question for you, Susie, is in light of kind of all the circular nature of, our movements and the mindset, it can be inspirational, or it can we can kind of hit that point of burnout. And so like, I hate repeating some of the issues within the isms of race, right? But I'm curious, what continues to inspire you, right? What keeps you inspired to do the work you're doing?
Well, either I'm a hopeless romantic, and I still think we humans have something really wonderful to create and offer. I suppose another thing, so I suppose that's love. I could call that love, inspires me. And fury inspires me too.
Yeah.
Absolute fury.
Yeah, that's
and
good.
That's on the big emotions. And then I think, God, I really have a very privileged life. Okay, I don't mean just because I live in the West and blah, 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 but I get to enter into people's lives.
Yes.
And have an experience of living with them for a bit. They're inside of me, and I'm impacting on them, and they're impacting on me. And I'm, to come back to the word curious, I love being an anthropologist of the mind, soul, and body. I just love it. But unlike an anthropologist, I get to comment on it, right? I get to engage with it. So I suppose it's love, fury, and interest.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And it's okay to be a hopeless romantic. We need that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, we need that 100%. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, it's such an honor.
So I'm almost tempted just to sort of sneak in one more question, and just because we've got you, and Susie, with your tremendous vision, experience, depth. I mean, sometimes I lose words at sort of your what you've done in your career. Where do you think, big question, but where do you think our therapy is going? Certainly at this time, all the things that we've spoken about today, really critical points in our society. But where do you think where are we going? Or are we going online? Are we going hybrid? Are we going to go back to faith? Like what
I don't know. It's really, it's a good question. And I think that's a whole different kind of question, really. Because we have to look, therapists are not futurists. We're retrospectivists, if you like. So we need to assess what we've learned recently. And I don't think we know what we've learned. At least I don't think I know what I've learned yet.
That's very humbling.
Right? We don't. I think the therapeutic language, I don't mean the diagnostic language, but the capacity, what we have to offer the world is trying to listen. That's something we can output to the world. Like, how the hell do we listen? How do we hear? What Eboni was asked, how do we do separated attachments? How do we listen and hear the other?
Yes.
And so have we learned new things from our hybrid practices, which we've had? That is something to really try and understand. One of the consultations I did, I don't know, maybe 6 months into, or 3 months into the pandemic, was for women museum leaders. And so I had, let's say, 25 of them online talking about the dilemmas and what they were supposed to do. And it was a collective conversation about the psychological and structural questions about what do you do when your livelihood, your museums are all closed. You've got staffs that you've been developing and leadership and, you know, what you've discovered about yourself. And, you know, so all of those things are really interesting questions I'd like to think about in terms of, should we be doing more group type of experiences? You know, what have we learned? I don't think I've learned. I don't know. I think I don't know what I've learned yet, or what we've learned yet.
Yeah. Thank you. Eboni.
Yes.
Are you able to see the Q&A? I am, but I
am.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we do have some questions that our listeners would like to know directly from you, Susie. One that stood out is, could you expand a bit more on the idea of destabilizing body?
Absolutely. I've got one myself right at the moment, but it's right in the very specific place, the throat. Okay, I think what I've understood is that the impact of these these industries, the structural assault on women's bodies, means that it's very hard to come to parenting with a body that is not anxious. So the miracle of birth, which I still do think is a miracle.
It really is.
Absolutely.
The miracle of growing a baby inside of you is tainted by tremendous pressures, which I think I mentioned early on, which are undermining. They're undermining to that, to the postpartum, first of all, the pregnancy period, but the postpartum period, which is when a baby is received into a relationship. And what we have looked at as psychotherapists is always how the parenting people or the grandparents or the nannies, whoever it is, how the psyches of those who raise babies form the psyches of the baby, right? The developing person. And what my work for the last period has had me preoccupied with is how the bodies of babies are received, the anxiety or the contentment, the way in which the baby is held, the way in which it's looked at, the way in which it is fed, whether it's with ease or with nervousness. the pressures on the body-to-body relationship are now so severe that my experience is that babies are absorbing the parental distress in their bodies that is and it is in the foundation of their bodies, so that they have destabilized bodies or insecure bodies. So we talk about insecure attachment at a psychological level, but I think there is insecure bodies too.
Sure. Yeah.
So there's insecure bodies, there's if you go through the attachment categories, or let's say you go through the psychoanalytic categories, you could apply everything that you apply to psyche to body.
Yes.
So you could have a borderline body if you want to use that diagnostic. You could have, if you could get just a neurotic body, that would be pretty good, but you know.
Right. Yes.
But you can have dissociated bodies. You can have compulsive. So that's what I mean. And body, the way that we're held, touched, seen, and the projections onto a body, you know, what those who raise us see in our bodies, what they convey, is also taken into the body of that person, of that developing person. Yes. And unfortunately, I think there is, particularly in Western culture, but increasingly in the way we sell Western bodies all over the world, there is a sense of bodies as being unstable, contingent, in need of fixing, always requiring attention, and in a way being false as opposed to secure bodies.
Yeah.
Being bodies that always have to be watchful. So, I mean, I've written so extensively about this that I really do refer people to the latest edition of Bodies, because I think it might be helpful in terms of exploring some of these issues about how does it come to be that somebody wants to get rid of a leg because they feel it's extraneous to requirements. How does that happen, that kind of thing? And how is it that, what is the impact of cosmetic surgery apps on little girls of 5? Where they think that the body is something that they will literally change.
Well, and you're speaking to the mirroring aspect, right? Which we know science supports, the mirror neuron. So a disorganized parental body creates, or not, it influences that disorganized baby body, right?
Exactly.
And so, yes.
And so then you can see all the sort of body things we were talking about probably half an hour ago as attempts to solve that problem.
Yes. Yes.
I think what's even more critical is that over time, that kind of epigenetic change, which over time that gives rise to sort of DNA change, it's not a great trajectory.
Right.
And so
and we have the evidence. We have the absolute evidence of that, all of which from the Dutch famine and then the Southampton study. So it's not. So again, I mean, sadly, this is a very rich field to be looking at.
Yes.
But the good news is we just had Dr. Rachel Yehuda on a conference about a month back, and she was talking about the impact of psychotherapy and therapy on the epigenetic change and how we can kind of reverse some of that. So I'm going to take probably one question, because we've only got 5 minutes left around, we've spoken about the impact on women and women trauma and the mental health impact. We've spoken about so many things, and one of the things that is really prevalent right now is obviously social media, these massive organizations, as you said, Susie, sort of selling bodies. It's an economy. What do you think are some of the changes that need to be made? Because like you've just spoken about a 5-year-old girl in an app, we're seeing our little ones influenced so young these days. And if we kind of link that to our epigenome, and we link the epigenome to our mental health, you know, it's not a great outlook. So what do you think are potential ways to start helping women and young girls through social media?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I really can't answer that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't have do I have the mental capacity to think this? We would need a hell of a lot of people to think through a really good intervention and how the hell we would get that through. I don't know. I mean, my focus at the moment is to create support for expectant moms, so that you get two populations in one. So by training the midwives and the health visitors, I don't know what they're called in America, but the people who actually deal with pregnant and postpartum women. So that what you do is you try to help the women who themselves are about to give birth to address their own troubled bodies, so that they also don't pass on that troubled body to the next generation.
Yes.
That is a tiny intervention. It could be very powerful. I don't know, you know, I don't, if I was speaking to Soros or somebody who had a lot of money and said, what would you do? Well, how would you take on TikTok and Facebook and Insta and all of that to create really great programs? I don't know. I mean, it'd have to be a really big team of thinkers to figure that one out.
Yeah.
You know, lots of visual stuff that would be about diversity and daring to live in your body and daring to get up. I don't know. It's too big a question for me, actually. And I think my capacities are a bit more modest than that, because I just don't know how to think that. I'm not the right generation also.
Thank you for your honesty. Eboni, should we take one more question?
Yeah, we have one big question, and we'll just take one more here, Susie. We had this question of, as a Latin American middle class, overeducated woman in the Boston area, there's a wondering how to help myself, my fellow women and men, when one is ostracized and rejected in the family or community for trying to tackle or name sexist ways or action.
Yeah.
It's the big question, right? Like,
no, but it isn't. It's a basic organizing question. You just still have to be a troublemaker. I mean, and you got to do, I guess, the older you get, you can do it more with a light touch. And the younger you are, the more angry you are, right?
Yes.
And the thing is, there are prickles. You're making prickles all the time in the world and in your own personal world. And you're not always effective, right? You're just not. Yeah. But it doesn't mean you don't get to comment. It doesn't mean you don't get to say, hey, come on, honey, that's not so nice. Or, I mean, I think there's so many different, you have to develop a style to do it, and you have to practice.
Yeah. That makes so much sense.
You probably have to have some great examples of anti-sexist figures who you admire that you can talk about and say, come on, watch this or do that. Because it's uncomfortable to change, but it's also wonderful. And people, you know, people will appreciate it. But yes, you might be ostracized or be an outsider for a while, but hey, better to be that and be true to yourself and be trying to organize than it is to just fold.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I know that's a crazy thing to say, but there you go.
Yeah.
Susie Orbach, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you as part of our keynote today. A real honor, and an incredibly deep and rich and hopefully for many thought-provoking conversation that can be taken into our therapy rooms and our communities and wider society from today. Thank you so much for your time.
Yes.
Well, thank you to both of you, to your organization, Tracy.
Mhm.
Lovely to meet you, Eboni. I feel so pleased to be able to bring all these agendas together under the rubric of therapy, because you know it's dangerous in some places, but it doesn't feel like that here, and it feels like a very important moment. And thank you so much for inviting me.
Yes, and you have doubled down my inspiration to continue to lean in, right? And so thank you so much for continuing the work that you started. That is one of the reasons why I can be here. So thank you.